A 25-year-old male Hispanic were relaxing in a lounge near the studio when a man walked into the studio, gun drawn, and opened fire. Mazel was struck once in the head, and killer passed a total of 4 security cameras on the way to the murder, at the door, up the stairs, and in the hallway leading to the studio. The caliber gun put on a ski mask and knocked over a woman as he opened the door. He then fired 3 shots, killing Mazel and injuring 25-year-old Ureko Ring.
Welcome to the Gossip Channel. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We're growing with you and because of you. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Once we hit that milestone, a special prize will be waiting for you. Stay tuned. And now, let's get into the topic. February 2024. Inside a Queen's courtroom, justice finally dropped like a hammer. 2 men were found guilty of eliminated Jam Master Jay more than 22 years after he was ambushed in his own studio. For decades, silence ruled, witnesses too scared to speak, rumors swirling about street politics in Queens, and even whispers linking it to the infamous night when a young 50 Cent got sprayed with 9 shots just months earlier. To understand what went down, we gotta rewind to that moment. Hip-hop lost a legend, and the truth got buried right along with him. 2 men now stand convicted for the murder of Run DMC's Jam Master Jay, gunned down in a brazen 2002 studio shooting that shook Queens to its core. Fast forward to February 2024, the courtroom was thick with tension as the jury read the verdict. And the names hit harder than the crime itself. Carl Jordan Jr., now 40, Jam Master Jay's own godson, and Ronald Washington, 59, an old friend crashing at the DJ's sister's place. The judge's words barely faded before chaos exploded. Washington exploded, yelling at the jury, "You all just taken out 2 innocent people." Jordan's crew snapped back from the gallery, cursing loud, while Jordan himself stayed cool, turning to them and saying, "I love you all." Nearly 22 years had passed since Jam Master Jay was murdered, 2 decades of dead ends, whispers, and fear locking the truth in silence, until now, when the wall finally cracked wide open. But this wasn't just about solving an old cold case. This was the unsealing of a bigger story, one that shook hip-hop beyond one man's death. Jam Master Jay wasn't just Run DMC's legendary turntablist, he was the gatekeeper who gave a young hungry Queens rapper named 50 Cent his first real shot in the studio, shaping the raw sound that would soon conquer the world. Jay was the one who schooled him, how to record, how to count bars, how to build a track from scratch. Before Get Rich or Die Tryin' ever existed, it was Jam Master Jay teaching a hungry kid from South Jamaica the blueprint of making music. But just months before Jay's own murder, that same protege, 50 Cent, was sprayed with 9 bullets in a brazen hit attempt. And for years, whispers refused to die. Rumors hinting those 2 violent nights were connected. The near death of 50 Cent and the murder of Jam Master Jay always felt tied together. And when the guilty verdict dropped, 50's reaction spoke volumes. On Instagram, he posted a screenshot of the news with the caption, "Welp, that's all folks, RIP Jam Master Jay. Short, cold, and final." The message was clear. After decades of speculation, the world finally had names and convictions. But the why and the dark ties between Jay's death, Queen street politics, and the young rapper he once called family still lingered in the shadows. To find answers, we rewind to a cold October night in 2002. Rain slicked down Merrick Boulevard, turning the street into a glowing ribbon under the lights. Inside the 24/7 studio, Jam Master Jay was chilling on the couch, controller in hand, locked into a video game with his friend Uriel. Tony Rincon sat across the room while Jay's business manager Lydia High flipped through paperwork. The vibe was calm, almost too safe. What Jay didn't know was that just minutes earlier, someone had quietly unlocked the fire escape door. That man, later named as Jay Bryant, slipped out unnoticed, but his move cleared the path for what came next. Up the stairs came Carl Jordan Jr., Jay's own godson, alongside Ronald Washington, his childhood friend. Jordan stepped in first, and Jay's face lit up with that warm family smile. They shared a casual half handshake. Then the energy flipped in a heartbeat. Before Jay could even move, Jordan pulled out a gun and pointed it straight at him. "Oh!" was all Jay managed to get out before the first shot cracked at point-blank range. The bullet slammed into his head, dropping him instantly. A second shot ripped into Rincon's leg, leaving him bleeding and stunned. Washington turned his gun on Lydia High, ordering her to the ground. She froze, face pressed down, too scared to move, while Rincon, in shock and pain, refused to ever speak to police again. The gunmen disappeared just as fast as they came. 4 security cameras caught nothing useful, even though the studio was only a 3-minute walk from the 103rd precinct. No outside footage ever surfaced. The only glimpse came from Tanya Edwards, a receptionist nearby, who swore she saw a woman in a floppy brown hat leading a man in a velour tracksuit toward the studio right before the shots. At first, she thought it was Lydia High, but years later admitted she wasn't sure. It all ended in seconds, a brutal execution, carried out not by strangers off the street, but by men Jay once welcomed as family. The shock of Jam, Master Jay's murder, shook Queens to its core that night. But inside the studio, silence ruled almost instantly. The very people who could have given police the clearest picture, Lydia High, Uriel, and Tony Rincon, barely spoke a word. Fear spread faster than the sirens could arrive. Just like the high-profile whack jobs of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G., Jay's case got swallowed up by whispers, street theories, and endless rumor. But the real problem was colder and way more dangerous. The witnesses knew the murderers, and they were terrified. It's no shock why it took years before anyone got indicted or arrested. Prosecutors later admitted the truth straight. The people in that studio that night weren't scared of cops. They were scared of retaliation if they pointed a finger at the men who executed Jam Master Jay in cold blood. That fear wasn't random. It came from the code everybody in Queens lived by. Snitches get stitches. Speaking up could mean ending up just like Jay. At first, both Lydia High and Tony Rincon lied to police, watering down what they saw and leaving names out. Rincon didn't crack until 2017, nearly 15 years later, when he finally flipped on his original story and pointed straight at Carl Jordan Jr. as the shooter. By then, time had buried leads, and even the tech had failed. 4 security cameras in the building gave nothing. Footage missing, cameras mysteriously disabled. To Jay's older brother, Randy Allen, there was no question left. His conclusion was ice cold and blunt. This wasn't just random violence. This was an inside job. Fear, loyalty, and betrayal froze this case in place for years. It took decades of shifting alliances and finally a few brave witnesses before the cracks started to show. With almost no one willing to talk, the streets filled the silence with speculation. In Queens, whispers ran faster than facts, and Jam Master Jay's murder turned into barbershop debates and late-night street corner theories. But one rumor refused to die, that his execution was tied to Queens' most feared drug lord, Kenneth Supreme McGriff, and the rising tension surrounding Jay's young protege, 50 Cent. Kenneth Supreme McGriff was no small name. He was the boss of the Supreme Team, the crew that ruled parts of Queens' drug trade through the 80s and 90s. By the early 2000s, his name was still spoken with a mix of respect and pure fear. Years earlier, 50 Cent lit a fire when he called McGriff out by name in his track Ghetto Koran, basically a lyrical street expose. Not long after, in May 2000, 50 was ambushed outside his grandmother's home and shot 9 times. Most believed McGriff orchestrated the hit. 50 lived through it, but the bullets carried a different kind of punishment, an unspoken blacklist. Record execs backed away, scared to touch him, but Jam Master Jay didn't fold. Despite the pressure, he kept 50 close, recording with him when others refused. Federal investigators later questioned if that loyalty sealed Jay's fate, if standing by 50 and crossing McGriff's world was the fatal mistake that put him in the line of fire. Word on the street was that Murder Inc., he said, the label tied to McGriff, used fear and muscle to keep 50 Cent boxed out of the industry. But for all the smoke, that theory never stuck. McGriff himself brushed it off, saying he didn't even know 50 personally, and while he'd heard of Jam Master Jay, the two had never even met. Eventually, the allegations vanished from government filings, and cops later confirmed it was no longer their main theory. Still, the damage was already done. The rumor burned into hip-hop history, becoming part of the legend, just another shadow over a case already drowning in silence. And McGriff's wasn't the only name floating around. In the absence of hard leads, every theory found its audience. Some whispers got wild, no matter how far-fetched. One story claimed Jay's own business partner, Randy Allen, had taken out a $500,000 Keyman life insurance policy and had him taken out just to cash in. Police checked it out but found nothing solid to back it up. Others said it was about old grudges, like Curtis Schoon, a former Queens drug associate, rumored to have ordered the hit over a debt. Schoon shut that down quick, saying Jay had squared up years earlier, and investigators never found proof otherwise. And then came the type of rumor that sounded more like tabloid fantasy than anything worthy of a case file. One rumor even pushed the idea of an affair between McGriff and Jay's wife, Terry. But that collapsed the second anyone looked closer. McGriff was under constant federal surveillance at the time, and there wasn't a shred of proof such a relationship ever happened. The real problem for detectives wasn't just separating lies from facts. It was that every rumor dragged in its own set of enemies, alliances, and motives. The streets were watching, but mouths stayed shut. With so many names swirling and so many theories in play, the truth of who really walked into 24/7 studio that night and why stayed buried under years of fear and silence. That web of rumors and dead ends kept the case frozen in place for years. But behind all the chatter about street beefs, debts, and industry politics was a deeper, more layered story, one that started long before that rainy night in Queens. To understand why Jam Master Jay died, you first gotta understand the life he lived. Jason Mizell was born January 21st, 1965 in Brooklyn, but it was in Hollis, Queens, where his legend began. By the early 1980s, the world knew him as Jam Master Jay, the turntable wizard powering Run DMC alongside Joseph Run Simmons and Daryl DMC McDaniels. Run and DMC held the mic, Jay commanded the decks, and together, they didn't just make records, they rewrote the rules of popular music. Run DMC was hip-hop's breakthrough act, the first rap group to go gold, the first to go platinum, the first to take over MTV with music videos that brought rap to the mainstream. They weren't just the first rap group on MTV. They were the first to storm the stage on American Bandstand. Their 1986 classic Raising Hell went multi-platinum off monster hits like It's Tricky, It's Like That, and their game-changing crossover with Aerosmith, Walk This Way, the track that dragged rap into Rock's arena and blew it wide open into the pop mainstream. But Run DMC was more than entertainment. They were role models. They pushed an anti-drug message, fronted public service announcements, and used their rhymes to steer young fans away from violent gang life. Their clean image made them loved, trusted, and respected in the same communities they rose from. By the time they hit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, and later scored rap's first Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016, their legacy was untouchable. Jay's place in hip-hop history was untouchable. To the public, he was a pioneer, a mentor, a leader in the community. But behind the bright lights and awards, the reality was darker. Jay was battling financial pressure and personal struggles that few could have imagined. And it was those hidden battles, not the wild rumors, that would steer him down a dangerous road toward the drug trade and straight into the real motive for his murder. By the late 90s, The roar of the crowds had faded. Run DMC, once unstoppable, had slipped past their prime. The tours were smaller, the checks were thinner, and the era they had built was already being taken over by a new wave of stars. For Jay, once the heartbeat of hip-hop's biggest stage, the numbers simply didn't add up anymore. Jay had launched JMJ Records back in 1989, the same label that unleashed hardcore group Onyx and later handed a young, battle-scarred Queens MC named 50 Cent his very first shot. But the industry had changed, and JMJ Records wasn't pulling in enough to keep the lights on, let alone carry the massive weight Jay had on his shoulders. And that weight was crushing. By the early 2000s, Jay owed the IRS close to $500,000 in back taxes, interest, and penalties. Still, he couldn't pull back. Jay was too generous, too loyal, always taking care of his people, his mother, his cousins going off to college, his wife and kids. He even covered his sister's mortgage. That loyalty kept him respected, but it also kept him broke. If someone in his circle needed help, Jay always found a way to say yes. But every yes came with a price.
Also known as Jam Master Jay of the legendary hip-hop group Run DMC, was murdered in cold blood in his recording studio in Queens. Taken more than 20 years. But today, a jury in this courthouse found Carl Jordan Jr. and Ronald Washington guilty of murder.
As Jam Master Jay, his real name, Jason Mizell, one of the founders of the groundbreaking rap group Run DMC.
Both men standing trial for the 2002 murder of the Run DMC superstar, found guilty on
Mr. Mizell back, but my sincere hope is that it brings some closure and solace to his family, his friends, his fans, and all those who loved and appreciated him.
Amazing, talent. He loved everybody. He was, he could never say no, because he just didn't push people away. He loved everybody, and he just couldn't say no. And I think that this contributed to this where we're at today.
So there's a bridge area almost on the record, and I learned to do those different things under Jay's tutelage. So, he's definitely been influenced.
Behind the clean, anti-drug image the public adored was a man boxed in by mounting debt and shrinking options. This was the pressure cooker, not petty feuds or street gossip, that pushed Jay into a decision he'd once sworn against. He stepped into a business he had long warned others to avoid. And that choice tied him directly to the very streets that would later be accused of taking his life. But bills don't respect legacy, and the IRS doesn't care about platinum plaques. With debts piling high and music checks running low, Jay started looking for new ways to keep everything afloat. The house, the family, the friends depending on him. Prosecutors say that's when he quietly shifted into a role nobody would have imagined for him: middleman. He wasn't on corners, and he wasn't running a cartel. This was a side hustle, connecting kilogram-level drug deals across New York and beyond, a desperate way to cover the gap between what he owed and what he earned. At first, Jay kept it small, quiet, manageable. But then came Uncle. That was the name Jay used for his supplier, who turned out to be none other than Terry Southwest T. Flannery, co-founder of the infamous Black Mafia family. Southwest T wasn't just a plug. He was a unicorn in the drug game, a supplier with power, reach, and a reputation that carried weight everywhere. With Uncle in the mix, Jay's side hustle grew fast. Bigger product, bigger deals, bigger money, but bigger also meant darker. More shadows, more danger, rivalries, and circles where debts never went unpaid and slights were never forgiven. Long before the end, Uncle had pulled Jay's quiet hustle into a world where exits rarely came clean. Even while juggling his own struggles, Jay poured his energy into something and someone far more uplifting. Back in 1996, when most of the industry brushed Curtis 50 Cent Jackson off as just another rough-edged kid from Queens, Jay saw a diamond in the dirt. He didn't just sign 50 to JMJ Records, he took him under his wing, molding him in the studio. Jay drilled him on the craft, How to write hooks that get stuck in your head, how to structure a track so it smacks from the very first bar. Jay taught me about choruses, about counting bars with a metronome. 50 later recalled in a BET interview. He made me think about songs, not just rhymes. That's how 50 remembered it. DJ Clark Kent recalled Jay bragging, "This kid's gonna be huge." Tony Yayo backed it up too, saying Jay was the one who really put 50 on. Jay made it his mission to push 50's talent above the street politics and gangster shadows that followed him everywhere. The tragedy? Jay never lived to see the explosion that came next. The hit records, the sold-out tours, the global superstardom, and after his murder, that bond with 50 Cent only fueled one of the earliest and loudest theories about why he was taken out. The night before, the studio was nothing but smiles. October 29th, 2002, inside 24/7, Jay couldn't stop talking about the news he'd waited years to see. 50 had finally locked in his deal with Dr. Dre and Eminem. Jay's cousin, Stephen Watford, remembered it perfectly. He was so happy about 50 Cent getting signed to Dr. Dre. We laughed, we cried. It meant so much to him. That's how the night felt. They lingered in the studio, swapping grind stories, replaying the Milwaukee trip they'd taken to celebrate 50's Shady Records signing. Jay moved through the room like a proud coach on championship night, clapping backs, flashing smiles, and reliving memories while picturing what the future could bring. But 24 hours later, that same studio was silent. The joy of that celebration still clung to the air. The last echo of a bond Jay had built, but would never live to see reach its peak. And for years, the whispers all pointed in the same direction. To many, it felt almost too easy to believe Jam Master Jay was executed for standing shoulder to shoulder with 50 Cent, even when half the industry crossed the street just to avoid him. In 2000, 50 Cent was ambushed outside his grandmother's home, 9 bullets tearing into him, and somehow he lived. In Queens, the talk was that the hit came because of Ghetto Quran, the track many believed exposed the borough's underworld. Soon, another story took root, that a silent blacklist had formed, whispered through studios and boardrooms, warning record labels not to touch him. 50's name was constantly tied to Murder Inc. and Kenneth Supreme McGriff in those rumors. Most people backed away, but not Jam Master Jay. He never flinched. He kept the studio doors open for 50, kept his name attached to a man others saw as career-ending risk. That kind of loyalty, some called it reckless. That kind of danger, others saw it as the perfect motive, at least in the eyes of investigators and fans alike. At first, it seemed obvious. The streets had reached into the booth and silenced Jay as payback for defying the blacklist. But the real truth? It was messier and way smaller than anyone imagined. It wasn't rap wars, it wasn't McGriff, it came down to 10 kilos of coke and a broken trust. In August 2002, Jay took the drugs on consignment, worth nearly $200,000, headed for Maryland. To move the weight, he brought in Ronald Washington and his godson, Carl Jordan Jr., but then came the fallout. Another dealer, Ralph Yachty Mulgrave, flat out refused to work with Washington, citing old beef. Jay made the call. Washington and Jordan were cut out. That decision didn't just slice into their pockets. It cut deep personally. To them, it was betrayal. And in the shadow world Jay had stepped into, betrayal always demanded blood. Prosecutors later painted it plain, a cold-blooded hit fueled by greed and revenge. Witnesses, some finally breaking 2 decades of silence, described how Washington stood at the door, gun in hand, while Jordan stepped up to Jay and pulled the trigger. They even bragged afterward, with one saying that if Jay were still alive, he'd eliminate him all over again. In the end, those guilty verdicts weren't just about closing a dusty case file. They were the final answer to a question that haunted hip-hop for 22 years. The world learned Jam Master Jay's death wasn't the result of some legendary rap beef, but the intimate betrayal of men he knew, trusted, and once helped. And the bitter irony, the legend who gave so much to others was taken down by his own circle. The man who stood firm against industry politics, who refused to abandon 50 Cent even when it was dangerous to be by his side, wasn't taken by rivals or rap beefs. He was taken by the greed of men inside his own circle. And with that truth, the story of Jam Master Jay didn't close neat or clean, but it finally closed after 22 years of silence. If you're rocking with this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to Gossip, smash that like button below, and drop your thoughts in the comments.